big news about General Flynn. Now, General Flynn, as you recall, was the National Security Advisor for President Trump, who was railroaded into a plea agreement where he pled guilty to lying when, in fact, he didn't lie. It's pretty clear. It was the beginning of the Trump administration, and James Comey, as he's admitted on tape doing, knowingly bypassed the rules and the processes to send FBI agents to interview General Flynn. And we since have found out that the FBI agents who interviewed him found him to be truthful. They did not believe he was lying. They were asking him about conversations he had with the Russian ambassador while he was still outside the government, but working for the president-elect of the United States. He was the incoming national security advisor. And the pretext for going into the interview was that they were concerned about his violations of the Logan Act, which was just completely bunk. I mean, the idea that you would target the staff of an incoming president in communication with foreign leaders and representatives under the Logan Act, which prohibits private actors from conducting their own foreign policy, is absolutely ludicrous. And the fact that they used it should tell you that there was a corrupt motive for the investigation. And of course, the investigation of General Flynn had begun in 2000, at least in 2016, maybe earlier, because it was all part of this fraudulent crossfire hurricane operation that allegedly began in the summer of 2016, but the targets they quickly focused in on were George Papadopoulos, Carter Page, and General Flynn. So the spy operation began almost immediately upon President Trump gaining the Republican nomination. And if you think that's a coincidence, then I've got a bridge in Brooklyn I can sell you. Now, they continued to spy on Flynn. They were sending FBI agents to spy on Flynn. And who knows what else. We asked for whether there were any FISA warrants targeting Flynn, and we got a response from the government that said they can't confirm or deny there was a FISA warrant targeting Flynn. So long story short, and it is a long story, the Mueller operation came in, took the conclusion that the FBI had made that he didn't lie, and turned it into, well, he did lie. And they forced him into a plea agreement. And he finally got himself new counsel, Sidney Powell, who's been an excellent lawyer. And Sidney is excellent, not because, I mean, she obviously has the legal acumen, but because she understands the depravity and the depths of the corruption at the senior levels of the Justice Department and the FBI. And so she went to town. And General Flynn withdrew his plea, or seeking court approval to withdraw his plea, and Sidney just pushed and pushed for a full disclosure of the documents required under law that the government's supposed to make to someone like General Flynn, a defendant in a criminal case. And finally, Attorney General Barr, sensing presumably something was off, had a third party look at these documents to see if they had turned over everything they were supposed to turn over. The third party was a U.S. attorney. I think he's in Kentucky. And so the U.S. attorney, so they've disclosed new documents that they should have turned over to General Flynn's legal team. And the documents are blockbuster. They're blockbuster. And they include emails between Carter Page and, Lisa Page and Peter Strzok and other FBI officials about whether to give Mr. General Flynn his warning that, the sort of constitutional warning you get, the legal warning you get that you can't lie to an FBI agent. Of course, they're required to do that. It's called the 1001 warning. And the language in the emails is, oh, well, maybe you can just slip it in. In fact, they never did give him the warning, which is another violation of the rules in the law. And the other documents are handwritten notes. It's been reported that they're by Bill Prestep, who is Strzok's immediate supervisor. And he's essentially writing, what is it we want to do here? Do we want him to admit to doing something wrong? Because he allegedly lied about what he talked to the Russians about, as opposed to misremembering or not recalling exactly what he talked to the Russians about. So do we want it, so the notes read, do we want him to admit to wrongdoing? Do we show him the evidence we have, which is what we normally do? Or do we want to get him fired and prosecuted? Well, we know the path they took to get him fired and prosecuted. And the fact that they had that word, do we want to get him fired, shows you there was no legitimate basis to question him. It was a political basis. It was a policy basis to question him. The case should be thrown out. They had no legitimate basis to go over there and secretly, skullduggerously try to entrap General Flynn, which is what in fact they did. Another set of documents has come out. So there were two sets of documents that had been released. The first set was those notes I told you about, those emails I told you about. Emails, by the way, which should have been given the Judicial Watch and which we've been fighting for 2 years now. You may recall, I've talked about, we've been getting document tranche after document tranche of struck page emails. The reason we're getting them one after the other is because they're turning them over to us monthly, the FBI is. They're only reviewing, though, 500 pages a month. And at this point, we won't get the full batch until late next year, after either Trump is elected or unelected. Can you imagine? They've got 8,000 page-struck emails they're sitting on right now. And those emails that they turned over to General Flynn should have been turned over to us, frankly, if the FBI was honest 2 years ago. They've got 8,000 records they're sitting on, 8,000 pages of records they're sitting on of page-struck communications. What are they waiting for in terms of turning them over to us? It's inexcusable that the Justice Department and the FBI continue to sit on this material. And I won't even get into the text messages. They haven't turned over one text message to us, practically speaking. They're taking the position text messages aren't subject to FOIA. Try using that argument if the FBI subpoenas your record. Oh no, text messages aren't subject to subpoenas. They're not real records. It's kind of like a Post-it note. You can't have it. That's what they're telling us. This has been a cover-up that's been exposed, not only of Trump, not only of the targeting of Flynn, but the fact is the FBI has had these records and knowingly have covered them up. They know what they did. The agency knew what they did. What's Wray's excuse for not turning them over? Wray being the director of the FBI. It's really outrageous. And then we get a document that Sidney Powell gets a document yesterday, or they're able to publicize a document yesterday through the court process, that the FBI, despite all the spying I told you about targeting Flynn, despite the abuse of power, the FBI concluded they didn't have a viable case. And that's a quote from the document. The memo was, we don't have a viable case, we're going to shut it down. But concurrently in the text messages, Peter Strzok is texting another FBI official whose name they're blanking out, and Lisa Page and others, saying we can't shut it down, we're not shutting it down, I'm intervening, keep it open, and he's doing it because the 7th floor is involved. The 7th floor is code for the leadership of the FBI, Comey and McCabe at the time. They all were in on it. Comey did it. I hope you've seen the video of Comey boasting about doing an end run around the White House lawyers to get his entrapment interview of Flynn with the FBI. And there was no good faith basis to interview him because they wanted to get him fired. I don't know what Judge Sullivan, who's the judge handling the case, is going to do with this. This is material that should have been turned over to the defense team under the judge's standing orders. Other documents that have been released publicly is General Flynn's declaration where he says he regrets agreeing to the plea deal, but he didn't know all the facts behind the corruption targeting him. He would never have agreed, for instance, he says, to the plea deal if he realized that the FBI had concluded he didn't lie during their initial interview. And other emails between the government prosecutors and Flynn's former attorneys show that the government was very careful to keep out the threat that they were going to go after his son, because that would have had to been disclosed to the court, and they avoided and they kept it out to avoid disclosure, which the law requires. Because Flynn was being used as a witness. That was part of the plea deal. And so if you're a defendant and the witness comes in, is a government witness, and part of the plea deal includes cooperation, my understanding of the law is that you're supposed to disclose what they got in return for cooperation. And if they got a promise not to prosecute a family member like his son, that was supposed to be disclosed. It's disclosable under law, and they were hiding it. They're hiding it. What is going on? And this, of course, was done by the Mueller operation. So you had the corruption at the FBI, DOJ at the top level at the end of the Obama administration, beginning at the Trump administration. Remember Sally Yates, the Obama holdover, who was acting attorney general for a time? She was pushing this attack on Flynn too. If you want to know how the coup began, it began with going after Flynn. Because, of course, in the end, it was all about President Trump. So is Judge Sullivan going to do what I think he ought to do, which is dismiss the case and, importantly, institute criminal contempt proceedings against those involved in this corruption and cover-up targeting Flynn? I don't know. Is Attorney General Barr and his prosecutors going to withdraw the charges based on the prosecutorial misconduct that's been confirmed? And by the way, there are other documents coming, so this could be just the tip of the iceberg. I don't know. But this is the way I think things ought to proceed. And and you can argue one way or another. This is just my point of view. I think the president should direct Attorney General Barr to drop the charges against General Flynn. The Justice Department reports to the President of the United States. The President of the United States has a positive moral obligation to police the Justice Department on corruption issues. This idea that the Justice Department is independent is constitutionally bunk. We see what an independent Justice Department does. They think they're above the law. They think they don't answer to anyone. The president's got to remind them they answer to the Constitution and the American people. And I know the left will say, oh, the president can't interfere with Justice Department prosecutions. He has a constitutional obligation, though, to uphold the rule of law here. Now, maybe Barr will do it and the president doesn't have to intervene. I suspect the only way to get full justice in this case is to have the president intervene. The other question is, should the president pardon Flynn? I've been of the long-standing view that virtually every American caught up in the Mueller operation and subsequent prosecutions like Roger Stone, which is kind of which was inherited by the Justice Department from the Mueller operation, should be pardoned. General Flynn should be pardoned. Stone should be pardoned. Manafort should be pardoned. Other Americans caught up in this should be pardoned as well. Now, I know Flynn, if he's exonerated, you're going to say, well, maybe he doesn't need pardoning if they drop the charges. That may be true. But if the president loses in November to whoever the nominee is for the Democratic Party, or whoever, I don't know, you can bet the left, if they control the Justice Department at least completely again, are going to target Flynn again. And I would pardon him just to be sure. And one could make the argument that pardoning him and detailing the reason why, because he was corruptly prosecuted in an effort to destroy President Trump and the coup, I think that would be educational and salutary. For the public good. And the other question is, what's going to happen with this gang that abuses their positions in the Justice Department, and the FBI, and other agencies to target Flynn and other innocent Americans? What's going to happen? Are there going to be prosecutions? I don't know about you. I'm tired of waiting. They've known about this corruption for years. Nothing's been done on the FISA-gate corruption. They know the president was illegally spied on. They know Carter Page was illegally spied upon. They know there was no good faith basis to smear him and to abuse the powers entrusted to them by the American people. The Obama administration did. And it goes straight to the top. Obama knew, Biden knew, Susan Rice knew, the whole leadership knew. They all knew what was going on. And the fact there have been no prosecutions and that Flynn is still being prosecuted by this Justice Department is an outrage. So I think something might happen over the next week, one way or another. We'll see. I hope Flynn gets off completely, at least before Judge Sullivan's court. But who's responsible for this cover-up? These documents they've been sitting on. They all knew what was going on. The reports are that Wray obstructed the release of these records, and his top deputy did, his top lawyer did. If that's true, they should be hauled before court and they should be investigated as well for obstructing justice. I'm serious, if that's true. It's that serious. If a corporate leader was involved or alleged to have been done something like that in terms of hiding or stalling the release of documents that was required by a court, they would be subject to criminal investigation. And that Mueller abused his power, his special counsel team abused their powers to target Flynn like has been exposed. They ought to be subject to criminal investigation. But I'm not seeing any evidence that's being done. I'm not. Maybe tomorrow they'll start doing a grand jury and everyone will be hauled in. I hope pray I'm wrong. But in the meantime, Judicial Watch is going to continue to do its litigation because we don't trust the Justice Department. We don't trust the FBI. We don't rely on them. We hope they do the right thing. But we won't be fooled into complacency, nor should you. The FBI is a seriously sick organization in terms of ethics. That's clear. Director Wray has done little, if anything, to clean up the FBI. Attorney General Barr has appointed Durham, but I'm not seeing Durham doing much. I've seen reports, he's hiring other people and, he's targeting Brennan. We'll see. I hope. One thing Durham is supposedly doing is something that Judicial Watch has already been doing, which is investigating the what looks to be illegal leaks targeting General Flynn. And General Flynn, around the time that it was January 4th, 2017, was when the FBI concluded there was not a viable case, but then Peter Strzok, on behalf of FBI leadership, intervened to keep the case open. There were leaks around that time that precipitated them keeping that case open of the conversation and the transcripts of the conversation that Flynn had with that Russian ambassador, which was, it was obviously classified, so any leaks of that material would have been highly illegal, depending on who did the leaking. And why is it a mystery? We don't know who the leaker is. Now, Sidney Powell alleged that the leaker was the head of the Office of Net Assessment, which is basically the Pentagon's think tank. And it's been there it'd been run by one gentleman for, I think, 40 years, and he was kind of a legend in the Pentagon, both good and bad. So this gentleman was a close friend, these documents show, that Judicial Watch has just uncovered thanks to a lawsuit. See, we don't wait for the Justice Department to do an investigation. We do our own investigation. And Powell had separately alleged in a claim, in a filing, that this gentleman, Mr. Baker, is his name is James Baker. So he's James Baker, the Office of Net Assessment guy, not James Baker, the corrupt general counsel for the FBI under Comey. So on November 1st, 2019, Powell's team alleged that Baker is believed to be the person who illegally leaked to Ignatius, who is David Ignatius, a Washington Post columnist and reporter, the transcripts of Flynn's December 2016 telephone calls with Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak. The Post published Ignatius's account of the calls on January 12, 2017. That was just a few days after Strzok was running around the FBI trying to keep Flynn's case open so he'd get questioned about those transcripts. What a terrible group of people they were. Setting in motion a chain of events that led to Flynn's firing in February as National Security Advisor. Now, Durham supposedly is reporting the leak, investigating the leak. So what these documents show is they don't show that Baker did the leak, but they do show that Baker was in regular and constant communications with Ignatius. The records include an exchange, for instance, on February 16th, 2016, a year before the leaks, with the subject line Ignatius, in which Baker tells Pentagon colleague Zachary Mears, who was then Deputy Chief of Staff to the Obama's Defense Secretary Ashton Carter, that he had, quote, has a long history with David and talks with him regularly. In an email exchange on October 1st, 2018, and a discussion about artificial intelligence, I think Baker is still over at the Pentagon, by the way, Baker tells Ignatius, David, please, as always, our discussions are completely off the record. If any of my observations strike you as worthy of mixing or folding into your thinking, that is as usual fine. Ignatius replies, understood, thanks for talking with me. In 2015, Ignatius and Baker had a total of 7 email conversations to set up meetings or calls, 2 simply to compliment one another, and 1 exchange where Ignatius invited Baker to speak at the Aspen Strategy Group conference. 2016, they had 10 email exchanges to set up meetings or calls and 2 to compliment each other. 2017, Ignatius had a total of 10 email exchanges to set up meetings, 1 exchange where Ignatius forwarded one of his articles and 1 exchange where Ignatius asked Baker for his thoughts on the Iran deal. And then in 2018, more recently, Ignatius and Baker had a total of 9 email exchanges to set up meetings, 4 where Ignatius forwarded articles and 1 where Ignatius asked Baker for tips on what to say at a quantum computer conference where he was speaking. You know, those of you in the business world, having 10 email communications with someone who's not a family member or a colleague in your office, and then having 4 or 5 meetings in a year with that person, that's a pretty darn close professional relationship. And if that person's a reporter, that means you're one of his key sources. There's no doubt about it. So does this prove that Baker was the leaker? No, but it does show that he was a source for Ignatius. These records confirm that Baker was an anonymous source for Ignatius, more important, again, off the record, and he should be directly questioned about all of his leaking to Ignatius, to the Washington Post. But we have confirmation that there was a secret leaker to the Washington Post here. And now the question is, did he leak this Kislyak transcript smearing Flynn, who did nothing wrong, by the way, in talking to that ambassador? It's what he was paid to do. This is another reason why Flynn should be pardoned by President Trump. It was his agent, General Flynn, doing his job for the president-elect to talk to foreign leaders. They're attacking his presidency and his right to conduct foreign policy. He's got to preserve his constitutional rights and the constitutional abilities of the President of the United States, not only him, but others, to conduct foreign policy without deep staters attacking him. Or attacking their people by trying to make up crimes to put them in jail.